In this video, I'm going to talk about lighting and how to modify the light source in a creative way using Gobos. What the hell are Gobos? Gobos in photography and cinematography are objects that are placed in front of a light source to modify the light. For example, a grid, it's a common gobo used to modify the light. With Gobos you are not just modifying the light, in fact you are reducing the light, adding shadows to the scene to change the mood. Let's say that in a scene we have a window and the subject is lit by the sun outside. We are not using HDRI, so you don't see anything outside. We are using a sun light source, which is a very strong parallel light coming into the scene. We can add, for example, something like this, which is part of the scene. It's a 3D model representing those bars at the window, so even if they're not framed, you see how just changing the light changes completely the atmosphere of the scene, adding detail on the surface. See, without and with. Massive difference. Let's see another example. We have this outdoor scene. It's very simple. There are very few objects in the scene, and the light is a plain sunlight. You can see here, this is the light, and adding a gobo would change completely the atmosphere of the scene. Now, there are different ways to add a gobo in the scene. The most logical way would be just build 3D objects, but it would be time consuming. Adding all the trees, for example, in this scene, the bars at the window, quite fast. In this case, if you want to add a lot of different details, it would take a long time, but mostly it will take a lot of computing power, so it would be slower to render. Moving into a simplified version where I removed all the texture from the scene so you can appreciate the lights and shadows, I'm going to show you what are the elements in this scene. I've just basically put together a bunch of elements that I downloaded from Blender Kit. So we have our camera here, of course our object, we have the sun. You can work with the angle parameter into the light settings. Of course, a smaller angle would give you the most neat shadow without any blurring, and as soon as you change the angle, the shadows will be a bit softer. But the sun actually acts almost like a point light. So this is why the angle should be very low. If you want some softer border, it's okay increasing it, but I wouldn't go above 0.2 for example. And this is very important when adding a modifier in front of the light source. If you have an overcast day, you don't have basically any shadow, so anything that you put in front of the light, it wouldn't work. And this is why this effect actually could work without the sun, but adding, for example, an environment texture, you can use an HDRI and you will get the same effect. The reason why I don't use an HDRI in this example, it's because there's more control using a sunlight. Gobos being light modifiers, the first thing we can do is adding a node to the light. If we have an area light, for example, we could add a gobo just using nodes. So with the light nodes, we can add an image. We don't see anything yet. One of the reasons is because the area light has a spread that is too wide. So we need to reduce the spread until we see the image. I will remove normalize so we can expand the light. We see the image is projected on the floor. We could use the strength, for example, instead of the color. And then with the color ramp, we can clamp the part that we want a shadow and the part that we want to remove from the lighting. So we are creating the same effect that we see before. Then we move the light. There are two main problems you can already see here. The first one is that the gobo as only the size of the projected light, so it doesn't project as a real object in the scene. Second problem is that if I want to animate the light, I would drag around the projection. It's a cool effect, but not for what we want to achieve now. The third problem is that if I switch to EEVEE, it just wouldn't work. Nodes are simply not working in EEVEE. I can also change the color to blue. In Cycles is doing all of this. Let's say even just the color of the light, but in EEVEE is simply not working. So we cannot use this system. So what are the options? We said that we are not going to build a bunch of trees around the scene, but we can recreate a physical gobo. As we see before, a gobo is essentially a filter put in front of the light. So I can import an image. It's a simply image. So I did image, mesh plane, and picked my image, which is this one. I also modified the image with the color ramp, and this time I used the alpha channel step by step. This is my image. Going to the color ramp to invert the image, clamping what I want to be transparent and what I want to be projecting shadows on the scene. But we don't need the base color, we need the alpha, and the base color of the object is gonna be whatever we want, but in our case it's gonna be black, so it's easier to understand. We can move the sunlight anywhere, it won't change a thing because it's parallel and it's across the whole scene. What may change is if we rotate the sun in different positions, or maybe using this it's easier. So here it's almost midday, or we can move, let's say, a 45 degree. But you see, we are going to have the same problem of the area light. As we move with the sun now is projecting shadows, but the gobo it's almost gone because the gobo it's actually above the scene and is going to work as long as it's perpendicular to the sunlight as much as possible. Say that we have some sort of sun like sunlight, so it gets very low in the horizon. The only way we can have this working is if we rotate the gobo, we have to move it away so it doesn't interact with our objects. And now we can see. It's not very convenient, it could work for still images, but it's not great for animation, for example. Here's the idea. Let's use a Gobo 360. It's using the same concept of an environment HDRI image, where you project your light source all around. When you have an image mapped onto a invisible sphere all around to get the light information, this time I built a sphere with enough subdivision because we don't want any segmentation going on, and because the sun or your HDRI project the lights from everywhere, from outside the scene, we can place this 360 gobo just outside the boundary of our scene. At this point we can rotate the sun in any direction we want. You will have always the effect without interruption, without lines that spoil the trick. You can have the lights coming even from below the surface, and the effect will still be there. Of course, normally you don't see the sun when it's below the horizon, but this system it's foolproof. With the Gobo 360, you can first of all rotate the gobo without worrying to the position of the gobo, because it's just rotating around this origin until you find some effects that you like. The difference is striking with or without a gobo. If you want, you can animate the geometry with some displacement, or animate the texture to have the leaves moving around, with some noise. But what I want to show you quickly is that once you have the setup ready, changing the image, let's say that we want to change between leaves to something like cable, more urban. Look how much the atmosphere changes, changing just the gobo image, which is also a very cool abstract if you ask me. And again, you can rotate in this case until you have something that you really like. If while you're working you want to remove this sphere while seeing the effect, you can go in visibility and remove that from camera. So the effect is still there, and actually you can still change the rotation to adjust the effect. One thing that it's very important to use gobo images, it's the resolution of the initial image. If it's too low, you're gonna see pixels in your shadows, which is not great. So you want to make sure that there's enough resolution. I would say any image above 2K, 4K, it's more than enough. In this example, I use just very normal images. They're not seamless, they're just some details that I liked. And if you look at the sphere mapping, you will notice that it's nothing special. Basically, I projected the image, the other side, from one side, the UV, from view, and this will create some kind of stretching on the border. Of course, you can try any different kind of UV mapping, or even better, if you want, and you have a 360 image, such an HDRI, let's take this sphere and just add an HDRI, which I downloaded from HDRI Haven, Polyhaven. Thank you guys. Now I have my HDRI image around my scene. Not to project light, but because I want to use this as gobo. This kind of foliage, this kind of environment as gobo. The HDRI itself, it's basically an overcast day, so you don't have any source of light, but we are only interested in the shapes, and we want to change it as we did for the other images. First of all, I want to show you this is the image we're using. You can use any 360 image, color ramp to create some contrast. Okay, let's say this is gonna be our alpha, which means we need to invert it. Just flip the color ramp, it's much faster. We want to see the white parts while the black will disappear completely. And then we're gonna use it as alpha, so make it black and remove all the shiny part, we don't need them. And then we want to probably move this at a more decent height, and I see it's already working. You can see here something. So let's get our sphere and just rotate so you can see the effect. Maybe it's too low, let's bring it up a little bit, yeah. You want to adjust the ambient light, probably something like so. And yeah, you can see the difference of the scene with or without this gobo. Thank you for watching this video and see you next time.